Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're looking at something really fascinating, Finnish-Ugric identity. Now, instead of seeing it as sort of this geographical outlier, genetics is painting a very different picture. It looks more like a vast, ancient continuum, believe it or not, a network stretching from the Baltic all the way to Siberia. So we're going to be sifting through the latest gene research today to understand how these connections are actually, etched into our DNA. Our mission really is to unpack what genetics tells us about how populations moved across Eurasia, how certain lineages spread out, and crucially, why we see this very specific Uralic paternal signature, this genetic marker, showing up so strongly in parts of northern Russia. It's quite a story.
It absolutely is. And to really get our heads around this intricate genetic landscape, we really need to start by clarifying some terms, what different genetic data actually measures. Because understanding those distinctions, it's key to unlocking the whole story. Then we'll trace the journey of a specific paternal lineage, the N-haplogroup, particularly N1C. Its role is pivotal here. We'll look at the ancient Siberian bridge it likely crossed, explore the Volga-Ural region, a critical crossroads, definitely. We'll touch on connections to groups like the Tatars there too, and then hopefully illustrate how this all paints a compelling picture of this vast interconnected Finnish-Uralic continuum right across Eurasia.
Okay, so let's start right there with those foundational terms, because, for those of us following these genetic discussions, it can be easy to sort of blur the lines. What's the really critical difference we need to grasp between genome-wide data and paternal lineages? Are they not basically telling us similar things about where people came from?
Right. That's a great question. And honestly, it's where a lot of confusion can creep in. They both tell us about ancestry, yes, but they tell fundamentally different yet complementary stories. Think of it like viewing a landscape through two completely different lenses, maybe a wide-angle lens and a zoom lens. So on one hand, you've got genome-wide data. This looks at an individual's entire genetic makeup, all the chromosomes, It represents a blend of all your ancestors from every single line going back. So this gives us the big picture, the broad overview. It shows overall population relatedness, the sort of proportions of different ancestral groups in someone's background. And at this level, this genome-wide level, Finns and other Uralic peoples, they generally look like part of a broader Northern European continuum. Though, importantly, often with a small but significant Eastern or Siberian component mixed in, which hints at those deeper, older connections. But then you switch lenses. You look at paternal lineage. Now we're zooming right in, focusing on just one tiny piece, the Y-chromosome. And this is unique because, barring very rare mutations, the Y-chromosome is passed almost exclusively from father to son, generation after generation, unbroken. So it traces this direct patrilineal history way, way back, thousands of years. These different branches on the Y-chromosome family tree, those are what geneticists call haplogroups. Each one is a deep ancestral line. And it's here on the Y-chromosome that we see this spotlight suddenly shine on the N-haplogroup, specifically its N1C subclade. This N1C becomes a really characteristic genetic marker for many Uralic populations, and importantly, for lots of other groups across northern and eastern Eurasia too. It's like a genetic signpost for a specific ancient journey.
That lens analogy really works. Helps clarify why you absolutely need both perspectives to get the full picture. So, okay, if the N-haplogroup, especially N1C, is this key paternal marker, what does it actually reveal when we focus on Russian populations, particularly in those vast northern regions you mentioned? What's the data showing us there?
This is where it gets really interesting. We see a very clear and quite intriguing pattern in northern Russia. Numerous genetic studies looking at different data sets, they consistently show a distinct emphasis, a higher frequency of this N-haplogroup in populations living in the northern parts of Russia. We're talking areas like Novgorod, Arkhangelsk, around the White Sea, places with long histories of, cultural and linguistic interaction. And crucially, this prevalence isn't uniform. It forms a very distinct gradient.
A gradient, like it changes smoothly.
Exactly. Imagine a map where a color gets stronger as you move in one direction. What that means is the further north you go into these specific areas, the stronger, the more pronounced this Uralic paternal lineage signal becomes. So, for example, while a central Russian population might have N-haplogroup frequencies down in the single digits, maybe 5–10%, populations up near Arkhangelsk or the White Sea, they can show frequencies well into the double digits, sometimes 30%, even 40% or more.
Wow, that's a huge difference.
It is, especially when you compare it to southern or central Russian populations where other haplogroups like R1a or I are much more common. It really stands out, like a genetic echo getting louder as you move north. It's a clear marker of ancient presence. And researchers interpret this, pretty conclusively, as an undeniable Uralic layer within the patrilineage, the father line history, of the Russian population in these specific northern areas. Now, it's really vital to add a nuance here, a very important one. This doesn't mean these northern Russians are somehow Uralic at the genome-wide level, that broader picture we talked about. That still largely aligns them with other Eastern Europeans. Instead, what this paternal lineage strongly indicates is a long, deep history of, well, coexistence. Trade, cultural exchange, intermingling with Uralic-speaking populations over many, many centuries. It's a genetic signature of sustained interaction, deep historical connections, not a sign of one group completely replacing another.
Right.
It's the kind of subtle but persistent genetic trace you'd expect when communities live basically side by side, sharing land, and lives for millennia.
So it's less about conquest or replacement and more like a really long-term genetic echo. A sign of ancient interactions, shared territories, continuous contact over huge areas. That makes a lot of sense. But it does raise the question then, where did this N lineage, this N1C that we see in Finns and Northern Russians, where did it originally come from? Where does that journey begin further back in time?
Right, tracing it back. The earliest origins of the wider N-haplogroup point towards East and North Asia, deep in what we'd probably call Siberia today. This N-haplogroup, including branches like N1C, seems to have embarked on this incredibly ancient, extensive migration path. It moved across what we can think of as a Siberian bridge. Now, picture this not as a quick march, but as small, likely mobile groups, maybe hunter-gatherers moving gradually over thousands of years, following game perhaps, adapting to harsh environments. They traverse these vast, cold expanses of Siberia, slowly making their way westwards, eventually crossing the Ural Mountains, which, interestingly, probably weren't always a barrier, maybe more of a corridor sometime.
A corridor, not a wall.
Exactly. And from the Urals, this lineage continued its journey, gradually moving into the Volga-Ural zone, that fertile region, that real heartland of interaction we need to talk more about. And eventually reaching as far west as the Baltic Sea region. Again, this wasn't like an invasion. It was a long, slow diffusion. A continuous flow of people and their genes over immense periods, thousands of years, possibly, and this deep, slow, persistent movement. That's what explains why Finns, and other Uralic peoples too, consistently carry that small but recurring northeastern component in their overall genetic makeup. You can see it even in the genome-wide data, not just the Y-chromosome. It's like a faint genetic echo of that Siberian journey.
So it shows up in both pictures, the Y angle and the zoom.
Precisely. It's a testament to a very long, very gradual population history, a continuous stream of influence and connection, not just one single arrival event. It's deep, deep history etched right into the genes, spanning a continent.
Okay, given that incredible journey across Siberia and the Urals, it makes total sense that the Volga-Ural region would be significant. But why is it highlighted as such a critical crossroads? It sounds like you're saying it was more than just a waypoint. It was like pivotal, central to this whole story.
You're absolutely right to pick up on that. It truly is, and has been for millennia, a major Eurasian crossroads. Think of it as a dynamic crucible, a melting pot where different worlds met, mingled, and, transformed each other. For thousands of years, this area has been home to both Uralic-speaking peoples and Turkic-speaking peoples, among others, of course. They weren't just passing through. They lived as neighbors, built complex societies, established these really extensive trade routes connecting East and West. And crucially for genetics, they intermarried extensively. It was just a place of constant cultural, linguistic, and genetic exchange, a real mixing zone. The Volga Tatars today offer a fantastic living example of this deep historical mixing.
How so?
Well, when you look at their paternal lineage profile, their Y chromosomes, it tells a really rich, complex story. You definitely see significant Turkic markers reflecting their linguistic and historical ties. You also see Western European markers, probably from centuries of interaction with Slavic and other groups. But importantly, their profile also distinctly includes the N lineage, that same N-haplogroup. Which isn't that surprising, given their history as kind of a birth population, situated in a region heavily influenced by Uralic groups long before major Turkic migrations. So what this shows really vividly is that the region wasn't about rigid box borders between groups, where one population stops dead and another begins. Instead, it was defined by these highly dynamic zones, fluid boundaries, permeable communities, where people constantly met, interacted, and blended. It was a true melting pot, maybe one of the earliest and most enduring ones in Eurasia. And that constant interaction is why it's so central to understanding how the N-haplogroup spread westward.
That paints such a different picture from, simple arrows on a map. It sounds much more dynamic, interconnected, complex. So, okay, bringing all these threads together, the paternal lineage, the Siberian journey, the Volga-Ural hub, how does this combine to give us a comprehensive picture? What does this grand narrative of the Finnish-Ugric presence across Eurasia actually look like when you put it all together, beyond just the N-haplogroup?
Yeah, it's helpful to visualize it, I think. We can imagine this deep historical and genetic footprint as maybe three powerful overlapping layers, like transparent sheets laid on top of a map of Eurasia, each one revealing a different part of the story. So the first layer is the genetic layer. You've got the N-haplogroup itself, plus that recurring northeastern genetic component we talked about, that subtle Siberian echo in the genome-wide data. Together, they literally draw this broad northern arc right across the continent, from Siberia through the Urals into the Volga region and stretching all the way to the Baltic Sea. And this genetic layer clearly shows that gradient pattern we discussed. The Uralic paternal lineage, N, being strong in northern Russia and then decreasing as you move south. It's like a fading trail showing the ancient genetic highways. Then layer 2 is the linguistic layer, the Uralic languages themselves. Think Sami, Finnish, Estonian, Erzya, Moksha, Mari, Komi, Udmurt, Khanty, Mansi, even Hungarian way out west.
Right, it's a huge family.
It is. A vast linguistic family, all pointing to deep shared roots. And their current geography, that's just a fraction of where they might have been spoken historically. And what's really fascinating here is hydronymy.
Sorry, what?
Hydronymy, the study of water names, river names, lake names. In many parts of northern Russia, the names of rivers and lakes seem to preserve ancient Uralic roots, even though the spoken language shifted to Russian centuries ago. Names like potentially Vologda or Luga. Some linguists trace these back to Finno-Ugric origins. They act like linguistic fossils, whispers of old tongues embedded in the landscape itself, telling a story of who was there before. And finally, the third layer, the network layer. We often think of rivers and lakes as dividers, but anciently, they were highways, the original superhighways of Eurasia. These waterways were crucial transport routes for people, goods, ideas, and along these routes, both genetic markers and linguistic features traveled and spread. The Volga-Ural region especially acted as this vital bridge connecting east and west, helping these genetic and linguistic threads move, and these networks stretched all the way to the Baltic Sea shores and north into Lapland. It shows just how interconnected these seemingly far-flung regions really were. They were the arteries of ancient Eurasia.
So, yeah, not isolated islands at all, more like flowing connections with rivers and pathways as these incredibly ancient vital arteries carrying genes and languages right across the continent. It really does make you feel like you're looking at living history. So, for you, our listener, how should we take all this in, this rich tapestry? What does it mean for how we understand concepts like, say, Finnishness, which often gets framed as very distinct, very Northern European?
I think the core takeaway, maybe the most powerful insight, is that Finnishness isn't some isolated dot on the edge of Europe like it might look on a modern map. Instead, it's really an integral part, deeply woven into this broad northern continuum stretching right across Eurasia. It asks us to think about identity maybe as more fluid, more interconnected, a product of deep history. Genetically, we clearly see those echoes from the northeast, the strong N lineage signal, that small but persistent Siberian component in the genome. It's a signature of those ancient migrations. Linguistically, well, the connection to the huge Uralic language family is undeniable. That itself speaks volumes about ancient links spanning continents. And even in the place names, from hydronymy, there's this deep, long-standing memory in the landscape of an ancient presence that predates today's borders. History runs deep. So when we overlay these layers, genetic, linguistic, network, we get a much richer, probably more accurate map of human history and interaction. On this map, the Volga-Ural is clearly a bustling crossroads. Northern Russia is an area deeply infused with Uralic paternal history. And the Baltic Sea Lapland region, that forms a long western extension of this vast continuum. It's not a simple linear story, is it? It's complex, multi-layered. It speaks to how profoundly interconnected human populations have always been. It challenges us, maybe, to think of identity not as fixed or purely local, but as something fluid, ancient, and deeply connected across huge geographies and through deep time.
What an incredible journey that is. Through time, through geography, it really gives you a completely new perspective on how history isn't just in books. It's etched into our genes, into the landscape itself, just waiting to be read.
Yeah, absolutely. So to quickly summarize our deep dive for you, The paternal lineages, especially N-haplogroup and that northern gradient, they firmly anchored this Uralic layer within northern Russia and the Baltic region. The Siberian bridge explains the deep origins, tracing that ancient journey. And the Volga-Ural region acts as the crucial knot tying it all together, with threads reaching far west and north. The result: this Finnish-Ugric genetic continuum, a vast, sweeping arc across Eurasia, definitely not an isolated island. It's a powerful picture of deep, interconnected human history.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other connections are out there?
Yeah.
What other seemingly separate populations might be linked by these invisible ancient highways of genes and language? What further bridges are just waiting to be discovered in our own ancestral maps, challenging how we see ourselves and where we come from? Thank you for joining us on this fascinating deep dive.